Hi there, my name is Lacey McCormick. I'm with the National Wildlife Federation, and this video is part of our initiative to help local and state organizations understand and talk about the impacts of the Sackett Supreme Court decision that narrows the scope of waters protected by the Clean Water Act. In a previous video, I talked about what it is that people understand about water and what it is that they care about. In short, people their number one environmental priority is clean and safe sources of drinking water. And it's not just their number one environmental priority. They list it as one of their top priorities overall. It's what they think government should be doing. If you're watching this video, you have probably heard that the Sackett decision will have significant impacts on our nation's wetlands, removing many of them, perhaps most of them, from the protections of the Clean Water Act. This video is actually about another type of water body that also has been put at risk by this decision, and that's streams. The decision has language that says that the waters protected by the Clean Water Act have to be relatively permanent. That's the specific term that they use. But many of America's streams are dependent on rainfall. The term of art is ephemeral streams. They flow during and after rainfall or other forms of precipitation. So we have always known that these rain-fed streams are very important to our drinking water supplies, but a new study in the prestigious journal Science, done by researchers at Yale and other universities, gives us a lot more specific information than we have ever had before. These rain-fed streams, these rain-fed streams provide more than half of all the water in our large mainstem rivers. They're critical to America's drinking water supplies. Most major American cities get tap water from reservoirs sourced by these rivers. I don't know, I can't say right here, sitting right here today, if the EPA will ultimately include that absolutely none of these rain-fed streams can be protected by the Clean Water Act. Some of them, particularly in the East, where it rains more frequently, might flow frequently enough for the EPA to decide that they are relatively permanent. But that isn't clear. The phrase relatively permanent is pretty vague and does not give us a lot to go on. So we just don't know how future administrations will interpret this phrase. This study is really granular in a way that we have not seen before. And the supplemental materials, I'm going to go to my next slide. The supplemental materials, you can see that in the bottom corner there, provides maps for each kind of sub-river basin in the lower 48. I've pulled out 6 here, but there's every single one in the lower 48. So if you follow the instructions there in the corner, you can figure out exactly kind of how much water that flows into your reservoirs comes from these rain-fed streams that may no longer be protected by the Clean Water Act. I hope that you've watched Jim Murphy's video where he talks about in kind of detail about exactly how the Clean Water Act. I'm going to do my best to summarize this extremely briefly. There's a lot of different elements to the Clean Water Act. One of the ones that's people may know the most about is that there's pollution discharge permits. Many, but not all of the states run their own pollution discharge permits, and they may be able to have a broader scope of waters than they may be able to apply these to a broader scope than the Clean Water Act does specifically. But the Clean Water Act has tons of other protections that if these streams are not protected by the Clean Water Act, then they will not be eligible for those protections. One key one is that most states rely on EPA to manage what they call the dredge and fill permits, Section 404 of the Clean Water Act. You need a permit. If you're going to permanently damage or fill in or just permanently create a change to a water body that's protected by the Clean Water Act, you need to get a permit to do that. And we saw in the previous video about what people care about, 88% of Americans think that's a really good idea and that we should have that. And we know that drinking water is their number one priority. So if you look to the right, you can see that the lower Colorado, 59% of the streams are considered to be rain-fed and therefore potentially unprotected by the Clean Water Act. This is an area with a lot of development. This is an area with just sort of a lot of, there's just a lot going on in this area. I would like for the streams that flow into our drinking water supplies to be protected by the Clean Water Act and have the full scope of protections. So I think that this, and I'm sure that this is true everywhere, right? And so I think that this is a good angle. This is publicizing the local impacts of this story is something that your local news media would be interested in. The study itself did get a lot of national news, but nobody's broken down for local media what it means, right where you live. And it has a lot of the elements. When I say it has a lot of the elements, I mean that it has a story that people can follow. It's at the end of the day, it's pretty simple. These streams are important for our drinking water supplies. They have long been protected by the Clean Water Act, and now they might not be. Let's talk about what that means. You don't have to have all the answers, but you can raise the questions and you can talk about what it might mean. It has a lot of the elements just because TV stations and other types of news, they need visuals. People are leaning, even newspapers these days are leaning heavily into video. And look at me here doing a video. They're leaning heavily into video. You could stand in front of the reservoir and talk to a TV reporter, or a TV reporter could report live on scene, from in front of your drinking water supply. They also have B-roll footage of the drinking water supply or of the rivers or streams that flow into the drinking water supply. So it has a visual element that a lot of news outlets needs. Also, there's maps, right? And every type of media outlet would be interested in this map. So again, you don't need to have all the answers. You don't need to know exactly how many of these streams will or won't be protected. You can say they might not be, we don't know. If you're not comfortable, sort of just going forward on your own with this story, you might want to work with, for example, I think that there's, if you have a school, your state university will have professors who are maybe they're hydrologists or maybe they're, water resources professors in either the planning department or the government services. I bet you could find someone else to kind of be an independent verifier of some type to come and help you kind of talk through what this might mean to the local media. And they often prefer to have two sources rather than just one person. And this opportunity, the story gives you an opportunity to ask for something specific. Now, what your ask is a question kind of for you to decide. You could end sort of simply just by saying, calling on the state to study this issue, what it means for the state. You could also, ask your local, whoever is sort of in charge of these waters, to do a study. Or you could specifically ask the state to protect these waters. And the other thing is that in a lot of states, we're seeing that developers, mining interests, et cetera, are stepping forward and trying to further narrow the scope of what states can do. We're trying to tie the state's hands specifically. So this story gives you a great opportunity to push back against that, any kind of weakening effort. So I realize that having seen these few slides and, listened to this relatively short video, you're probably not ready to immediately leap forward and do a story. But if you're interested in exploring this, I would be happy to, walk you through it, talk to you how you might do it and what might make sense for you. My contact information is available elsewhere in this toolkit. Thank you so much for listening.